It's Thanksgiving week, and so I'm bringing you some running back rankings, doing a tier rankings. We haven't done this type of video in a hot second, but when we pull up here in the S tier, we started off with an elite level running back in Joe Mixon, starting it off for us here, going up this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So it's an absolutely juicy matchup for Joe Mixon, who is the RB7 on a fantasy points per game basis this season when we're looking at Joe Mixon with over 21 fantasy points in full PPR. Absolutely have to love where Joe Mixon is the RB2 in fantasy points per game with 21.1 fantasy points. Like we said, we love this matchup versus Jacksonville. Absolutely have to be loving a guy like Joe Mixon. The second running back in my rankings this week, going up against the Jets, it's going to be Kenneth Walker. And there's a lot to be talking about when it comes to Kenneth Walker. Going up against the Jets, this Jets team has been absolutely demoralized. But on a points per game basis, even though Kenneth Walker's only played in 9 games this season, 17.9 fantasy points, love this matchup for Kenneth Walker. Coming in as my RB2 this week, my RB3 is going to be Saquon Barkley. And Saquon Barkley, even though it's not the best matchup versus Baltimore, Baltimore has been very stifling against the run. I don't know how there was any way that I could put Saquon Barkley any lower in my overall rankings this week, especially after what we saw out of Saquon Barkley last week. Absolutely amazing game from Saquon Barkley. So got to feel great about him here in the S tier. And moving on to the next guy, it's going to be Bijan Robinson. And Bijan Robinson going up against the Chargers, very good matchup. I would argue it's the 4th best matchup out of all of these running backs, which is why I have him as an RB4. Dude's been an absolute league winner, putting up double-digit fantasy points all the way through. I was missing him on bye last week, so if you do have Bijan Robinson back, you got to feel very good about it. And we're going to round off with 2 more guys here in the S tier. Next guy is going to be Jonathan Taylor, and Jonathan Taylor is going up against the New England Patriots. Absolutely love the matchup for Jonathan Taylor heading down here down the stretch. My last guy, rounding out this S tier, it's going to be CMC. And after everything we saw from this 49er team without Brock Purdy, we'll have to see if Brock Purdy is going to be playing this week as CMC goes up against the Buffalo Bills. They're going to need CMC in this overall game. Feel pretty good, confident in this top 6 guys. You let me know down below if I'm missing out on anybody in this overall S tier. We started off with the A tier, and Derrick Henry is starting this off, and it's not a great matchup for Derrick Henry by any stretch of the imagination in this week 13 game as they're going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. So a little bit difficult of a matchup for Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, but the part that we do get to see is this rushing title on the line for both Saquon Barkley and both Derrick Henry. So absolutely have to feel great about both of these guys going forward. Gotta be loving Derrick Henry. You're starting Derrick Henry this week. No ifs and doubts about it. Next guy we're going to talk about who's Kyren Williams, who's been a little bit disappointing this season, at least when we're talking about him as the RB12 on a points per game basis with only 16.4. It hasn't been league winning like in last season by any stretch of the imagination, but Kyren Williams has a juicy matchup versus New Orleans. This is a New Orleans team that's coming into this week absolutely struggling. So I want some Kyren Williams. I think you could make the argument that you maybe should debate Kyren Williams over Derrick Henry, but that's a little bit hard because you're talking about matchup being the priority there instead of overall performance. Got Kyren Williams there. I talked about Jahmyr Gibbs as being a league winning running back down the stretch. Absolutely love the matchup versus Chicago. Chicago is pretty stiff against the pass, which is only going to benefit a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs and like a guy Dave Montgomery we'll talk about a little bit later. Have Jahmyr Gibbs here sliding in the A tier. Next guy in the A tier, it is going to be Breece Hall, who we saw a resurgence from Breece Hall over the last 2 weeks, even though this offense and the situation of what's happening with Aaron Rodgers is definitely in flux. But even if this offense is in flux, a guy like Breece Hall being able to get all the touches going up against this week against Seattle is going to be super intriguing. And Breece Hall, even though it's been a down season, is still the RB10 in points per game, which for a lot of people, 60.7 is where he's at right now in full PPR. You would not be considering Breece Hall there. Next guy is going to be the RB4 in points per game. It's going to be Alvin Kamara. In the same way that we said the matchup was juicy for a guy like Kyren Williams, Alvin Kamara is going to have to be getting majority of the work in this overall game. Going up against the Rams, got to feel good as my RB10 this week. Feeling confident in a guy like Alvin Kamara. And rounding it out with Devon, who since Tua Tagovailoa has been back, has essentially been a league-winning running back. RB8 on a points per game basis this season was 17.3. Like this matchup this week as the Miami Dolphins are going to Green Bay. It's going to be cold. It's going to be a cold game in Green Bay for this Southern team. We saw last year a guy like a Jalen Waddle pop off? Can Devon pop off in this game? We shall see. Now, going through the B tier, we're going to do this a little bit faster. So we're going to have Josh Jacobs. We're going to have David Montgomery. We're going to have Tyrone Tracy. We're going to have Tony Pollard. We're going to be having Chase Brown, James Cook to round out the B tier. And we start this off with Josh Jacobs versus Miami. We saw Josh Jacobs get a huge touchdown game this last week, which 100% benefited Josh Jacobs overall for fantasy football. Absolutely love to see it. David Montgomery, we'll have to see. Like I said, we're recording this. This is coming out on Tuesday. We're recording this on Monday. David Montgomery was battling a shoulder injury. So if you do have any sort of David Montgomery shares, definitely be monitoring that as we come down the stretch. David Montgomery is someone that is expected to play. Could have gone back in the game on Sunday, but they held him out because they did know they had a short week. Tyrone Tracy, who didn't have the best game this last week, but who on the Giants did. I mean, it was the Tommy DeVito absolute suck show. They're going up against the Dallas Cowboys defense, which has been pretty bad against the run. But can Tyrone Tracy get the volume? Can this team, this offense do anything on Thanksgiving Day? I wish Daniel Jones would sign with the Dallas Cowboys. I think that would be an ultimate level revenge game for the Giants, but have Tyrone Tracy here. Tony Pollard, a lot of people have been pushing him up the rest of the season rankings. We'll have to see where he lands for me this week going up against Washington. We then got Chase Brown, this matchup for the Bengals is not as ideal as you would hope for going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So definitely want to be taking that into consideration. And then James Cook rounds out this overall tier with James Cook versus San Francisco. It's not the best matchup. It's not the best matchup by any stretch of the imagination, but you do have to have James Cook here. And like we said, guys, if you guys haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button. We are on the way to 5,000 subscribers. I don't typically do running back rankings. I don't typically do wide receiver rankings, but with trade deadlines being over, with you guys and needing some help on Thanksgiving week as we approach the playoffs, I was like, hey guys, we got to give ultimate level value to the audience. And so I appreciate you guys. No start sit streams this week, but answering every start sit question down below. So make sure you are tuned into this. We move into the C tier and we got Bucky Irving sliding in ahead of a guy like a Chuba Hubbard who's next. Chuba Hubbard, Bucky Irving both have looked good in their run. Chuba Hubbard versus Tampa Bay this week. Bucky Irving versus Tampa Bay. Two juicy matchups on the line here. Next guy's going to be Kareem Hunt. And like we said, we are recording this on Monday. It's coming out Tuesday. So if you're watching on Wednesday or Thursday, what is Isaiah Pacheco's role going to be this week? I assume he does play this week, but how much run and what type of run is he going to get? Is it going to be beneficial for his overall fantasy football value? And how much does that eat into a guy like a Kareem Hunt on this overall team? We move on to Ramondre Stevenson, James Conner, and then DeAndre Swift to round out this overall C tier. Ramondre Stevenson's going up against Indy, James Conner's going up against Minnesota, and then DeAndre Swift is going up against Detroit. Once we get pretty much to Bucky and Chuba, anybody behind this in the C tier does start to make me feel not as great, not as confident week in and week out. So I definitely just wanted to kind of bring up the fact that if you got these guys, we're hoping for high-end RB2 status. We're hoping they fall into the end zone. That is kind of what I'm relying on here with like DeAndre Swift versus Detroit. We got James Conner versus Minnesota, and then Indy for Ramondre Stevenson. There we move on to the D tier. We got Brian Robinson. We got J.K. Dobbins. We got Aaron Jones, Rico Dowdle. Travis Etienne's getting to bump up my rankings a little bit this week, and then Najee Harris. And we started off here with Brian Robinson Jr. and B-Rob is going up against Tennessee. We saw him almost potentially get injured this last week. Glad he was able to bounce back from that. J.K. Dobbins versus Atlanta. Rico Dowdle versus the Giants. Rico Dowdle pretty much has taken over this clear RB1 role. Now, with no Dak Prescott, it's not like it's been a super effective role for Rico, but he did get a ton of work this last week. And Rico Dowdle right now sliding in as the RB31 with 11.2 fantasy points per game. We got Aaron Jones sliding in here, and Aaron Jones each and every week versus Arizona. It was a little bit disappointing this last week. We'll have to see if he's able to bounce back. Travis Etienne versus Houston. This is a juicy matchup for Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. I do have Tank Bigsby about 5 spots below, and then Najee Harris rounding this out in the C tier. And we move on to this last and final E tier for us, and we're going to have Isaiah Pacheco, Rachaad White, Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, Jalen Warren, and then Tank Bigsby. Like we said, we wanted to give you guys a full RB35 tier list here. And so with this last tier, we got Isaiah Pacheco. How much work is Isaiah Pacheco going to be able to get with Kareem Hunt and him in this week 1 game back from injury? Could it be slow? Could it be like with what we saw with Jonathan Brooks? Let's not forget that it was a super serious injury for Isaiah Pacheco. Rachaad White, Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, Jalen Warren, and like I said, Tank Bigsby to round out my overall rankings here in the running back landscape. So if you like fantasy football, if you like winning, hit that like and subscribe button. Appreciate each and every one of y'all for tuning in. It means the absolute world. As we're on the way to 4,000 subscribers, it's Turkey Week. Like I said, not full level graphics that we typically do. I just wanted to make sure that you guys were getting the content that was going to help you win your fantasy football lineups. Check out these 2 videos if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.